Hello, Tom Barnett here again with another story behind the illustration. Here, one that has to cover a lot of ground, pun intended. The message here is a simple one. All species across the world are exhibiting the same instinctive response to climate change. They're moving, which is one hell of a lot easier than adapting and beats the heck out of dying. Those being the three great choices imposed on nature by human-caused climate change. Climactic zones are themselves moving at increased velocity, also primarily toward the poles. And so nature is following in what can be described as the great geographic reorganization of the planet. So where did I find this all out? It seems like pretty arcane knowledge. I came across this study 13 years ago. A meta-analytical study, meaning a study of studies, all of them tracking species movement. This study came up with the following averages. Species have been moving up in elevation at just over 1 meter per year. Species have also been moving poleward, or to higher latitudes and away from the equator, at roughly 1,700 meters per year. Doesn't seem like that much, but on a global scale, we're talking about a lot of movement. And as the study notes, this movement, measured at the turn of the 21st century, is 2 to 3 times faster than previously measured across the 20th century, meaning it's picking up speed considerably. In combination, these three findings, based on numerous other studies reviewed, struck me as quite a big deal when I first encountered them back in 2011. Rest assured, the pace of movement is arguably much faster today, given all the trends. So about a dozen years ago, I started briefing this particular slide, and you know what? It's the one that really gets people thinking hard about what this all means and how much nature is changing all around us. Just about everyone has encountered such evidence, typically in their backyards. So everything in nature is shifting to include clouds and weather patterns and climactic zones. Some species, like viruses, tiny and fast at procreation, are doing just fine. They can adapt. Bigger and longer-lived species, those are the ones going extinct before our eyes in the 6th great mass extinction era in this planet's history. All this movement combines to transfer arable, habitable land from the lower latitudes, where such land will be lost, to the higher latitudes, where it will be revealed as climates shift and become more temperate at higher latitudes. So that was my pitch with this slide, the greatest resource transfer in human history. So the question was how to get all these dynamics somehow represented in a single image, no caption. Serenado's first attempt, I thought, was pretty cool. It centers its perspective from one of the poles, presumably the north, and suggests a racetrack running similarly poleward. Who's making the dash? Crops, most importantly. Mammals, of course. Can't forget insects. They're the ones whose movement tends to spook us most. Clouds literally stacking up at higher latitudes, creating more tumultuous precipitation. And then, of course, humans themselves. I liked the whole package, but felt the perspective would be too hard for most people who would see the implied globe and imagine everyone running south. Of course, that still makes sense if you think of everyone moving towards the poles, but for the average person, the far larger bulk of movement of species is towards the planet's northern quartile, because there's so much land up there relative to the far sparser southern alternative. Jim Nuttall's first cut took the same basic imagery but reversed the perspective so that we're seeing our characters from behind, heading presumably northward. The landscape here is much more naturally displayed, starting with the drought-crippled farmland, the shriveled crops. Your eye is drawn further up to people and species, all on the move, following the clouds to something better. You put it all together and you have strong imagery that I, as a student of history, associate with America's tragic Dust Bowl era of the 1930s. Nature's insult on top of the injury that was the Great Depression. So, farming, disabled, and people put on the move out of sheer desperation. Note that in this image, we're missing one of Sarah's original 5 entities. We'll address that later, as you will see. Switching to the wider angle, which was the decision we made in concert with the publisher after we decided on the book's basic orientation, i.e. it was going to be taller than wide. Jim achieves a much more panoramic vision here, with the clouds that much more clearly on the move and a stronger sense of a land abandoned to ruination. Jim's third iteration brightened the rainbow imagery at the top, which I thought was a nice touch. The promised land is now northward. The Red Team review sought to restore the missing bugs, the one of Sarah's 5 archetypal images in her original conceptual, once again showing the utility of her work, which somehow always informed the final product. Which gets us to the final image, replete now with bugs, ants marching on the left, presumably some indestructible cockroach on the right. So a lot to capture and imply in this single image, but I was really happy with the result. The sort of sadness implied here goes well with the Simon and Garfunkel song referenced in the thread's title. And that is the story behind the illustration. As always, we love it when people buy the book, when they recommend the book, when they praise the book online. I and my Throughline colleagues, we feel very passionate about this work. Please consider subscribing to my Substack newsletter, and see you next time, next illustration.